We're following a major update in the case against the Colorado dad accused of killing his wife on Mother's Day in 2020. Barry Morphew sat in court Tuesday in Colorado as a judge determined to change his bond. This is the second time that Morphew has been accused of killing Suzanne Morphew, but this time, prosecutors have what they say is a huge piece of evidence: the missing woman's body. And her sibling has some harsh words for his former brother-in-law. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Barry Morphew has been in custody since his arrest on June 20th of this year in a case that goes back more than 5 years to Mother's Day 2020. It is possible that Morphew could get out of jail ahead of his trial because of what happened in court this week in Colorado. This is video of Morphew entering the court Tuesday for a bond hearing. His attorneys say he's innocent and they wanted his $3 million cash bond lowered to $500,000. His defense attorneys pointed out that he has two daughters, one that was in high school when their mom went missing, one that was in college, and both of them are standing by their dad. Now, I'll break down what the judge decided to do in just a moment, and I'll also tell you the bombshell words that Suzanne Morphew's brother has for the defendant, Barry, in this case. But let me bring you back to when this story started in 2020 and the people who make up this story. You have Barry Morphew, who we talked about, his wife Suzanne, and their two daughters. The four of them seem to have a perfect life. They lived in Salida, Colorado. The place is an absolute postcard. A gorgeous spot. It has incredible views, an attractive spot for people who love the outdoors and getting away. In fact, in 2020, Suzanne had just picked up mountain biking. And it was on that day, Mother's Day 2020, that law enforcement received a call from neighbors who had spoken with one of Suzanne's daughters, and they were worried that they hadn't heard from their mom. Police responded to the Morphew house, but no one was there, and there was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, the door was locked, and Suzanne's car was in the garage. Later that day, police found Suzanne's mountain bike. That was less than a mile from her home. Her helmet was found in a different location, 0.8 miles away from her bike. Deputies then called her husband, Barry. Now, Barry worked in the construction industry, and he had left early that morning to go to a job in Denver, which is more than 2 hours away. He told deputies that Suzanne was sleeping when he left the house at 5 o'clock in the morning. He also was working all day, so he said he didn't plan on calling his wife, but then he got a call from neighbors who were concerned that Suzanne was missing. Here's body cam video of deputies' first interactions with Barry Morphew when he made it back to Salida. I want you to listen closely to what he says.
Where is it? Where's the bike?
Oh, it's right there.
Where was it?
It was like just right down here in this little embankment right here. So, sorry, check this, dude. I got the husband on the scene here with me.
Right now. It's gonna be okay. I'm here with my daughter. She's at Barry's house.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah, you can go down there.
Was it a crash?
I mean, the bike looked, the way it was laying, it kind of looked like it, but there's not really that much damage to the bike. That's the thing.
Lion?
Yeah, it was just like
Was
lion.
there no lion? Mountain lion?
I didn't see anything that would
I didn't see anything, and they're not letting us go over the side.
Because we're getting a track.
Dogs, we're bringing dogs in.
Just right down in here.
You can hear Barry is emotional in talking to members of law enforcement. It's important to remember, though, at this point, this was not a murder case. This was a missing persons investigation. And Barry, he seems to be jumping to some conclusions. He suggests that maybe a mountain lion killed his wife. And a few minutes later, he brings up mountain lions again.
We just want to double check everything, so yeah.
Did anybody look for foot tracks on the road?
I haven't seen anything really, but
Like people tracks? Were lion?
I didn't really notice, but I won't lie, I'm not like an expert tracker or something, you know?
The deputy goes to speak with other members of law enforcement and then has to tell Barry not to touch the bike and not to contaminate the scene.
Hey, could you not touch the bike with your hands, please?
Hey guys!
That's the husband. Because I've been wearing gloves, I've been trying not to. So.
The investigator then asks the deputy how Barry seems.
I didn't seem a little distraught, but he's kind of going back and like, why didn't they check the recruit? I'm like, you know, we're trying to do the best good. And this guy, I guess his name's, he showed up on his own. I guess Barry. Hey Barry, are you guys, where are you guys headed? Okay. Here soon I'm gonna probably get have you come and talk with us more. All right, thanks, man.
Now, from what I heard there, the deputy says that he seems a little distraught over his wife missing. Deputies then go with Barry back to the house. Now, you can also sense that Barry has law enforcement's attention at that point, especially because of one piece of clothing that was found in the laundry room that you would assume someone would take if they were to go mountain biking.
What you grabbed, right? Those shorts? Yeah. Those are for mountain biking. Yeah. Like the padded shorts you were wearing when you were mountain biking. Yeah. So, that, I'm curious.
Yeah, I saw that they were bike shorts.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about where Barry went on the day that Suzanne went missing. It was a work trip, he said. He left early in the morning before daybreak. But then investigators talked to his coworker who said they weren't supposed to be up near Denver until Sunday night. The employee and Barry were also supposed to ride up together. But Barry, out of the blue, he said, decided to go up early on his own in the morning, hours before they were planning to leave. The coworker said that he finally got up to the Denver area, and when he got there, he noticed that Barry hadn't brought the tools that he would need for the job, and none of the work was done. Now, after looking at surveillance cameras, deputies say that Barry spent less than a half hour at the job site. He spent the day driving around a town, 2.5 hours from his house, dropping items into trash cans. This is according to investigators. Then, in the hotel where Barry stayed back in 2020, that coworker told the Daily Mail that when he went back to the hotel room, it smelled like chlorine, which the hotel staff says they don't use to clean with. I want you to remember that part because in 2025, chlorine could be a chilling clue. Hey, before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I need to take a moment and talk about something important because with my job and throughout my career, I've traveled a lot, and that means plenty of nights at hotels and away from home. And for as great as it can be to travel, you get burned out after a while and you find yourself just wanting to be home in your own bed. And for me, that is especially true ever since I switched to Cozy Earth. Cozy Earth has bamboo sheets that are temperature regulating, so you're not waking up sweaty or freezing, you're just comfortable all night long. They also have the bubble cuddle blanket. That is a total game changer. It is ridiculously soft. It has a textured bubble design. It looks amazing draped over the couch or bed if you're not using it. It's something that everybody in the house is fighting over. And here's the thing, once you feel the difference, you get why Cozy Earth stands out. They even give you a 100-night sleep trial. So if you don't love them, you can send them back. Plus a 10-year warranty because comfort like this should last for the long haul. So head over to CozyEarth.com and use my code Law&Crime for 40% off. And if you see that post-purchase survey, let them know you heard about Cozy Earth right here because your bed shouldn't just be where you sleep, it should be your happy place. Cozy Earth makes that happen. As far as Barry's personal life, he told investigators that he and Suzanne had a great marriage, but investigators would later believe that was a lie. Even a young kid who spoke to deputies when they first arrived on scene when Suzanne was missing seemed to know that there were some issues.
You can answer honestly.
You know, I think they've had some problems.
Okay.
Yeah, in the past.
Like, just normal.
Normal husband and wife type deal. I would
They
say.
like talk about separating or anything
They
like
have, yeah.
Okay.
I would, yeah.
And you know this through
Macy.
Yeah, I'm very
Macy.
close with her.
Yeah, it's
her
it's
daughter.
important that you, at this
I know,
point
I know,
you
I
tell
know,
them
I know.
anything that
Yeah.
you know like that.
Yeah.
Then you have cell phone messages that really showed the extent of the problems that Barry and Suzanne were having. Investigators found on Barry's phone he had allegedly deleted a text chain with his wife that included a screenshot that read a text from Suzanne that said, quote, "I'm done. I could care less what you're up to and have been for years. We just need to figure this out civilly." According to investigators, Suzanne was having an affair with someone who lived out of state. This marriage was crumbling, and investigators at that point had a potential motive, even though Barry was going public, calling for tips, calling for information that he was hoping would bring his wife home.
Suzanne, if anyone is out there that can hear this, that has you, please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back.
Then let's get to what the cell phone data that prosecutors have said. Suzanne's electronics showed her last activity to be around 2:11 in the afternoon. Barry's phone then turns off around 4:37 in the morning the next day before it turns back on at 5:37 when he said he was going to be on that trip to Denver for work. Data from Barry's truck also allegedly shows some odd activity, like from 3:25 in the morning to 3:49 in the morning on May 10th when Barry said he was sleeping. Investigators noticed that Barry's phone showed it pinging around the house at the times that it was on during the 2 p.m. hour on May 9th. Now here's an image of what was presented as evidence. Barry said he was chasing chipmunks around the house with a gun while Suzanne was sunbathing. Then you have this evidence that very much ties into what Barry is now facing here in 2025. A needle cap that goes to a tranquilizer dart that authorities found in the dryer, which they believe came from Barry's clothes. Investigators arrested Barry in May 2020. They believed that what really happened was Barry shot Suzanne with a tranquilizer gun, then chased her around the house until she passed out. Then he killed her and disposed of her body. The daughter who lived at the house was out of town the weekend all of this happened. Now, the charges did not stick, and it wasn't for a lack of evidence. In April 2022, right before Barry's murder trial was set to begin, prosecutors said they couldn't go forward with the trial, and they asked for charges to be dropped. It turns out that the district attorney didn't turn over evidence to the defense, and several of the state's witnesses were barred from testifying. The district attorney, Linda Stanley, ended up getting disbarred over this, and Barry walked free. But the judge did say that prosecutors could one day refile charges. More than a year after Barry's charges were dropped, the bombshell in this case, if there is just one. On September 22nd, 2023, Suzanne Morphew's body was found in a shallow grave a few hundred feet off a road. Investigators say the majority of her bones were recovered, but they were significantly bleached. Now, bleached could mean a couple of things. I talked to Joseph Scott Morgan, a former medical examiner. He often comes on our show. He's the host of Body Bags. And when I talked to him about this, he told me that bones could be bleached because of exposure to the sun. But also, I thought about that chlorine smell in the hotel room of Barry Morphew in Denver that his coworker talked about smelling in an interview with the Daily Mail. Could Barry have tried to cover up his alleged crime using bleach? We are waiting to learn more from prosecutors about that. Now, along with her bones, deputies found a cancer port, which is how patients receive medicine, like an IV, as well as the bike clothes that she was known to wear. But a new twist in that is that the new indictment claims to show the clothing lacked evidence of decomposition, which they believe means that Suzanne was not wearing those clothes at the time her body decomposed, and there was a lack of evidence suggesting that where she was found was the original grave site where she was decomposed. Quote, the forensic anthropologist opined that based on these factors, it was unlikely Suzanne decomposed from a fresh body to a skeleton at this location, it read. And what also may be a smoking gun in this case is the tranquilizer chemical cocktail that is called BAM. B-A-M. The autopsy found its presence in Suzanne's remains. It's often used on animals. Back in 2020, there was only one company in the United States that produced this chemical mixture, and it was only available to someone through a prescription from a veterinarian. The Morphews moved to Colorado from Indiana in 2018. Back then, Barry was a deer farmer, according to the indictment, and he bought BAM in 2018 before his move to Colorado. Investigators looked to see who else in the surrounding counties had purchased BAM. And get this, quote, records further showed that no other private citizens or private businesses in any of the surrounding counties had purchased BAM prescriptions from 2017 to 2020. Other than the local park services, Barry was the only known person in that area to have that substance, which was found in his wife's remains. In bold letters, prosecutors write, ultimately the prescription records show that when Suzanne Morphew disappeared, only one private citizen living in that entire area of the state had access to BAM, Barry Morphew. A grand jury indicted Barry Morphew for the alleged murder of his wife, Suzanne. He was arrested in Arizona and was sent to Colorado. And this is new video of Barry being booked in Arizona after his arrest. When Barry returned to a Colorado courtroom back in July, he looked at the gallery and gave a big smile. According to KMGH, that smile was to one of his daughters. Both were in court on Tuesday this week, and they seem to still be standing by their dad. Now, they could be a big part of this case going forward. When Barry's charges were dropped in 2022, they went on Good Morning America with him.
I just love my girls. And I love my wife.
Bond was set at $3 million cash. Back in July, Barry's lawyers filed a motion to get it reduced to $500,000, which brings us to what happened in court this week. No witnesses were called in this bond hearing, but Suzanne Morphew's brother filed this victim impact statement, which read in part, quote, "I have laid awake many nights pondering the last few minutes of my sister Suzanne's life," and goes on to say, quote, "As she contemplated marriage to this monster, her thoughts migrated to a question she repeated innumerable times in her life: what was I thinking?" And her legacy will hopefully help others, men and women, avoid the fate she has suffered with her marriage to a heartless narcissist. Now, in court, the defense argued that Barry is an innocent man, and that will be proven in court. They also point to previous bond conditions that Barry was given in his previous court case, and they say he followed all the rules when he was out on bond previously.
I admit that the evidence has changed to the slightest degree. Of course, thankfully, with the discovery of Ms. Morphew's body, but importantly, the substantive evidence and the problem that the government has had in finding the proper person responsible for this offense, Your Honor. The evidence itself has not changed, although the theory of the government has, and that has been ever evolving. Your Honor, the evidence of Mr. Morphew's innocence is substantial, and I think through the coming months, the court will see that when the time is ultimately proper. But in deciding whether or not to reduce Mr. Morphew's bond from $3 million to what the defense is asking for, which is $500,000, the court should take into consideration and can take into consideration Mr. Morphew's past conduct. We know, Your Honor, that Mr. Morphew was released on a $500,000 bond. And throughout the litigation of Mr. Morphew's case, Ms. Morphew's unfortunate death, Mr. Morphew did exactly what bond is supposed to do, which is that Mr. Morphew appeared for every single court appearance. He followed every single requirement of the court, and at no time had any problems complying with the orders of the court. And there is nothing about the evidence, and there is nothing about the charge that has ultimately changed that.
The prosecution pushed back on the defense's notion that the new evidence in this case was only a slight change now that Suzanne's body has been found.
But I think the most important thing that the court considered is the court had the actual indictment in front of her and read that this case is a very different case than the one that was filed in 2021. Obviously the facts of this case will be litigated in trial. Defense counsel is asking the court to consider that the evidence presented in the indictment is just slightly different than the 2021 case. Nothing could be further from the truth, Judge. In this case, the remains of Suzanne Morphew were found. The remains of Suzanne Morphew after an autopsy contained a chemical compound that Mr. Morphew had almost exclusive access to, tying him directly to the remains of his wife. The case in 2021 was arguably entirely circumstantial with no body. This case is very different.
The judge then said she took into consideration that Barry's daughters, who lost their mom in this story, they are standing by their dad. She also said that Barry doesn't have significant ties to the community, so she denied the motion to lower the bond from $3 million, but she did change the conditions of it.
Therefore, in weighing each of these factors and making an assessment of Mr. Morphew's specific situation, I declined to reduce his bail, but I am going to modify his bond. I'm going to modify his bond to a cash surety or property bond. In this district, we often set bond at a higher surety or property option with a lesser cash-only option, but I won't be doing that in this case. The reason why is because if Mr. Morphew posts bond through a surety and then absconds, he not only has $300,000 on the line, but there's also a bail bonds person who would be tracking him down. And if he chose to post a cash-only option, then he would have $3 million on the line. If Mr. Morphew posts bonds, the added conditions are that Mr. Morphew may not leave the state of Colorado for any reason. Mr. Morphew will have a GPS monitor placed on him before he is released, and he may not leave his home for any reason except for medical emergencies, to attend medical appointments, to meet with his attorneys, or to attend court. The GPS monitor company shall submit a report to the court at least monthly and shall report any violation, including tampering with the monitor or failing to keep it charged immediately. Mr. Morphew will surrender any passports he has. He will also use only the name Barry Morphew in any personal, legal, and business dealings, and he may not petition to change his name legally during the pendency of this case. He may only drive vehicles that are properly registered to him and that comply with the Colorado Department of Revenue's rules. And finally, Mr. Morphew shall comply with the mandatory protection order that I'll be issuing here momentarily and will advise Mr. Morphew about in a few minutes.
Joining us now is criminal defense attorney from Colorado, Eric Faddis. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us. What does this decision by the judge mean for Barry Morphew?
So Barry Morphew's bond was not reduced in terms of the monetary value, but the conditions were changed. And so now he is able to post a bond via cash, surety, or property. That makes it easier for him to get out of custody. Perhaps he can enlist a bondsperson to assist. Perhaps he has property that he can put up to try and post that bond and fight this case from the outside.
Because I know it's a $3 million bond he was set with. I mean, typically, is that like 10%? Because I think if somebody would, he has a home in Salida, I think it's still in his name, $300,000, you put up your home and then you would be out. How does that typically work when it comes to, okay, the bond's now surety, what do you do next? And at the time we're recording this, I don't know if he's posted the bond yet, doesn't appear so, but if he was to get out, what would be the process?
Yeah, Chris. So as you kind of mentioned, the bond was originally $3 million cash, which means he would have to come up with the $3 million in cash money. Here, since it's been changed, he can enlist a surety. He can use any property he has as collateral to try to put up that bond. So long as he can come up with $300,000 in one form or another, a surety will likely take on this case, post the entire $3 million. He would be able to be released from custody at that point, and it makes it easier to kind of talk with your lawyers to discuss investigation, defense strategies, that kind of thing. It's much more difficult to do that when a person is behind bars.
In this case, and we'll talk about some of the comparisons between what he's now facing, the evidence the state has compared to the first time that he was charged with Suzanne Morphew's murder, but he was arrested in Arizona. He wasn't facing charges at the time, so he was free to go wherever he pleased. They now have her body, which is a pretty significant piece of evidence in this case, and we've talked about some of the evidence that he's facing. What do you make of the judge's decision to make it, in a lot of ways, easier for Barry Morphew to get out as he's waiting trial?
The judge has a lot to consider here. The judge has to consider whether Barry Morphew is a risk to the community, whether he is a flight risk, whether he might up and skedaddle and leave town. And like you said, he was found in Arizona, but at that time, charges had not been pending. So he was allowed to move freely about the country. I think the judge also took into consideration the fact that the prosecution really botched this case in the first go-round, had to dismiss it. Barry Morphew is presumed innocent. However, there have been, like you said, factual developments like the finding of the body and the forensic analysis of what was in Suzanne Morphew's body that I'm sure gave that judge pause in terms of not lowering the monetary condition of that bond.
Because I know that there's, for people who are watching this who might be in different states, and typically, when someone's accused of murder, there are some states where it feels like they're just going to spend time in jail as they await trial. When you see this decision yesterday by the judge, how does that compare to other decisions that judges in Colorado typically make?
It's not terribly uncommon. It's not inconsistent with other high-profile murder cases necessarily. And $3 million is still a huge uphill battle for anybody to try and post in terms of a bond. And so I think the judge, recognized the gravity of the case, recognized the fact that, hey, Barry Morphew could try to leave the state, after the first case was dismissed, he went to Indiana and then he went to Arizona. So he's been moving about the country. The prosecutors allege that he's using different automobiles and using different license plates too. And so I think the judge took that into consideration in thinking, hey, could this person try to flee the jurisdiction? If so, we've got to make sure there is a secure monetary bond in place, and $3 million provides that security.
And how long does it typically take? Like yesterday, they make this decision. If Barry Morphew was going to get assets together, how long does it typically take in this type of case when you are talking about it's not like he, I don't know what his financials are, but, to have $300,000 just lying around or the process of putting a house up or something like that, typically what does it take? How long would it take for him to post bond? Because at the time of this recording, and it may be dated by the time people see this, Barry Morphew is still in jail.
In all likelihood, Chris, Barry is going to have to liquidate some assets. That can take some time. He will also have to find a bondsperson who's willing to put up $3 million. Not all bonds people, work on bonds that are at that level. Now, there is a law in Colorado, Chris, where if someone posts a bond, as a general rule, they have to be released within 48 hours. And so if this bond is posted, the law requires him to be let go in short order. And we could see him back on the streets of Colorado fighting this case from the outside.
That'd be fascinating to see if he walks out of jail again, because I know you were in Colorado and we've talked about it when Barry Morphew the first time around had charges dismissed. And before we get into kind of the X's and O's of how that went down, when you look at the case that Barry Morphew is now facing compared to the first time that he was arrested, how strong of a case does the state have now compared to back then?
The real game changer was when the state found Suzanne Morphew's body. Keep in mind, they didn't have that during the pendency of the first murder case. That's a huge development. You really need that in a homicide case to show the person's actually dead. On top of that, the forensic analysis of Suzanne Morphew's body that allegedly revealed the presence of this very kind of remote tranquilizer to which it said only Barry Morphew has access, in addition to some veterinary science professionals in Colorado. That sort of draws a direct line from Suzanne Morphew's demise to Barry Morphew. That is going to be a huge game changer and strengthens the case substantially.
Yeah, it was powerful. And in the, I think it was the affidavit the second time around, probable cause document, where it was just in bold letters, there is one person that the state believes could have access to this chemical who is not a member of maybe the local wildlife agency, and it's Barry Morphew. Let's go back to the first time around where Barry Morphew, people were suspicious. I think it's fair to say that, because in some of these cases where a spouse is dead, people look at the husband and there was that. But then Colorado, the state of Colorado, the way they handled this ended up leading to this case being dismissed. What stood out to you then about what happened and the decision to then release Barry of these charges? It wasn't, it was said that they could file them at a later date, but just, it felt like it was a mess just looking at it from the outside.
Oh, what a debacle the first case was. The prosecution has a constitutional duty to make sure there's a level playing field, to make sure that the defense has all material and what's called exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that tends to negate guilt, in their possession so they can defend against the case. Prosecution didn't do that. They failed to turn over DNA results that arguably implicated two other male profiles that are not Barry Morphew, that are associated with Suzanne Morphew. They failed to do that. They got dinged for that by the judge. On top of that, the prosecutor was making these prejudicial statements outside of court that could taint the jury pool. That prosecutor was ultimately disbarred, Chris, which is a tremendous sanction. That first case entirely fell apart, but here we are at round two.
I think back to that too, and this all happened in a pretty rural, beautiful part of Colorado, but a rural. This wasn't in Denver. This wasn't even in like Colorado Springs. Like this was in Salida where it all took place. When you look back at some of the prosecutorial misconduct, And this was a case, I mean, I get that there's a lot of national pressure and attention that probably that part of the state doesn't regularly get, but was there ever a reason why the state went about it the way they did, in a way where they put this case at risk that they had against Barry Morphew?
You know, no hate against Salida. I used to go there yearly. It is a gorgeous piece of Colorado majesty. That being said, it is a rural jurisdiction. They don't get a whole lot of high-profile murder cases, and murder investigations can be of a different character than a theft case or an assault case, something like that. You know, I think some commentators believe that the authorities there may have been in over their heads and may not have adhered strictly to best practices and standard protocol when it comes to turning over evidence to the defense, when it comes to conducting themselves during press conferences the way that is required to not to ensure the defendant has a fair trial. So I think some of those factors came into play. There is in fact a new prosecution team on it now, and they have, at least at this juncture, not made those same missteps.
And as far as where this goes from here, because if you're the defense attorney for Barry Morphew, you're looking at this chemical that was found in Suzanne Morphew, and the prosecution will present what they wrote, or will try to, if it's, you know, presented as evidence that he's the only one that could have had it. I mean, as the defense attorney, what are you doing? Like, what would you expect the strategy for Barry Morphew to be if this goes to trial?
Few things to consider on the defense perspective. One is that it is largely circumstantial. That there's no direct eyewitness who saw him do this. There's no video or photographic evidence depicting him doing this. It's sort of trying to connect the dots, if you will. On top of that, you know, I think the defense has to attack the sloppiness of the forensic analysis that has happened throughout the entire case. That includes the DNA analysis, which I said arguably implicates two other male profiles associated with Suzanne Morphew. If they're going to botch something like that, you know, how much faith can we put into the forensic analysis of Suzanne Morphew's body? Is it at least possible that someone put their finger on the scale and tried to tip the scales of justice in the favor of prosecution? I think the defense has to at least consider those arguments, and they're difficult to make. It's sort of in the world of a conspiracy, but we've seen those play out before in cases. Look at the Karen Reed case. Those arguments can get traction, and it's something the defense will likely explore.
Barry Morphew's two daughters, to this point, I believe they are still in his corner, even, you know, since he's been arrested again and the body of their mom has been found. I know on the other side, Suzanne Morphew, she has a sibling that submitted a letter yesterday arguing that Barry should not have his bond changed or lowered. But what role do those daughters, being so visual by Barry's side, play for the defense?
You know, my heart goes out to them. What a horrible predicament to be in, to be made to feel like you have to choose sides between your dead mother and your father, who's accused of killing her. You know, I think the defense is going to do serious interviews with those daughters, see what they knew, and you know, if they were around all of the time, they were observing how their mother and father interacted, and they had no suspicion that their father did any of this, I think that could be compelling to a jury.
And then Barry Morphew, just I find him to be an interesting, you know, I hate using the word character because this is a real person's life and this is a life or death situation, but he has come into the courtroom a couple times. He has a smile on his face. When the charges were first dismissed, he went on Good Morning America. I don't know how I would act if I was in his shoes, guilty or not. What do you make of the way Barry Morphew has gone about this, you know, since his arrest?
You know, I think if I were his counsel, I'd advise him to be a little more cautious, a little more understated, in part because you got to know your audience. We're in rural Colorado. We're in Salida here. This is sort of a mountain adjacent town. And those folks might be put off by someone who's sort of, you know, taken a victory lap on national talk shows and who's being very public and, you know, regardless of whether he is morally entitled to act whatever way he wants, which he is, I think strategically, he's got to look at not offending the people who will ultimately decide his fate.
And as far as what could happen next, well, actually, before I get to that point, because kind of on the Salida part of this and it being a rural part, It's not a place where a lot of people live. A lot of people know who Barry Morphew is. Would you expect the defense would try to move this trial just because of all the publicity? I don't know if Denver would be a spot. It seems like he has a lot of national attention, but would that be something that you could see the defense trying to do?
Certainly, yeah. Change of venue is always something to consider, especially in a high-profile case in a small town, because the concern is that there is a smaller jury pool. They have likely been exposed to media coverage about the case, and perhaps they formed some opinions about guilt, about Barry Morphew, about any of those considerations. And so certainly it's something to consider on the defense's side to move this to like a place like Denver or even Colorado Springs or Boulder. There are a number of options that are just outside the Denver metro that could be a good fit as well. But I think the judge is likely to keep it where it is and have it play out for that community in which this allegedly occurred.
And lastly, at the end of the hearing yesterday, there was a little bit of the jockeying back and forth between the prosecution and the defense about handing over evidence. I think the discovery was in the terabytes of information that they were given. So there's a lot to go through. And there was talk of a trial potentially being next summer. What do you make of that timeline and whether that could be how this plays out?
Sure, that's setting it a little far out, but it's a massive case. That being said, the case has been pending since Suzanne Morphew disappeared. Really, that's when the investigation started, and so that's been what we're going on 5 years now or so.
Yeah.
Barry Morphew has a right to have a speedy trial, and he's already been, hung from the rafters once, figuratively speaking, in the original homicide prosecution that was dismissed. Here we are at a second go around. Perhaps there are discovery issues that are still continuing. If I was Barry, I'd probably be pushing for something sooner in hopes that the prosecution can't get their act together like they couldn't the first time.
Yeah, and we'll see how this plays out. It'll be interesting. He could be able to be out on bond and not be behind bars, but it's, think of this going on now 5 years, Mother's Day 2020, when all of it began. Eric Faddis, criminal defense attorney from Colorado. Thanks as always for being with us on Law&Crime.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Barry Morphew is next expected in court for a status hearing November 3rd. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.